Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I have a project that's been highly anticipated on my social medias. It is Wolverine's helmet, or cowl, or whatever you want to call it. Now, if you notice with mine, it does not look like the movie, and that's because while watching the movie, there are a lot of aspects to the armor that I really liked. The mask was not one of them. I thought the eye openings were way too big, the ears were too small, it was not proportional to the rest of the shape of the armor. So, being a cosplayer, you can manipulate all this stuff and make it how you want. So if you want to take my PDF files, modify them, and make one that's more movie accurate, by all means, do that. But being a child of the 80s and 90s, I decided I wanted to make a Wolverine helmet that was a lot more retro. And I can do that because I'm Willy Wonka, this is my chocolate factory, and I get to make what I want. Now this helmet is made completely out of my HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And if you want to continue to support me, by all means, go through the links that are in the description section and those that are on my website. So I want to show you what it takes to put Wolverine's helmet together. Let's go ahead and get started. A shot of the quick prototype that I made to create the final templates. And to start this helmet build, we're going to take part A and trace and cut that out of some 6mm foam, making sure to carefully cut out the darts in the top and the back. Utilizing my respirator and using some weldwood contact cement, I'm going to apply the adhesive to these darts. Once the contact cement had dried, the foam can firmly be pressed together, and I'd recommend to start from the outside in. Bob Smith superglue is then used to glue the two halves together. To get the curve to the top of the helmet, we're going to use parts B and C. Part B is going to be traced, mirrored, and then cut out of some 6mm foam. Part C is also going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam, making sure to note a midway point. Contact cement can now be applied to the interior seams, and a heat gun is used to help manipulate and roll the foam to make it easier to go together. Take your time with this and kind of use your fingers on the back side to line that up first, and then come back and press the seam together at the top. Part C is now going to be attached to these two pieces using some more contact cement. I try to make sure to line it up in the exact middle, and then I curve the foam to meet at either end. With this middle section complete, it can now be set aside to work on the back of the helmet. Part D is going to be traced, mirrored, and then cut out of some 6mm foam. We need a slight compound curve with this piece, so after heating it with a heat gun, it's going to be rolled up and down and then front to back. The inside facing seam of this piece can now be attached to the back side of part A. And with the front and the sides of our helmet complete, the top can now be attached. Start in the very front using part C and part A, and notice that there's a seam indicating where these two pieces line up. Then slowly work your way along the front to the halfway point. From there I'd switch and line up the back, and then press the two halves together until they meet in the middle. Adding more weldwood contact cement to the opposite side, this process could then be repeated. And if your seams aren't pretty, don't worry about it, we're going to cover them up later on. For the lower back section of the helmet, we're going to use part E. This is also going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam, making sure to note the middle. Some Bob Smith superglue is applied. You could also use contact cement, but then this seam is lined up with that middle mark. After the middle has been secured, you could then work your way along to the outside, adhering part E to the back side of part A. This piece also helps the back of the helmet keep this rounded shape. Using my rotary tool and a sanding sponge, I knock down the seams until they're flush, and then I can go in with my heat gun and lightly heat seal the foam. The nose will be made out of part F, which will be traced and cut out of some 4mm foam. I score and heat 2 lines on either side. This is going to help define the bridge of the nose. The top of the nose can then be superglued behind where the two part A sections intersect. The sides of the front of the nose are then glued to part A. This piece can be a little tricky, and you may want to dry fit it first before gluing it into place. And I removed some material on the inside with my rotary tool to make it a little more comfortable to wear. The cheek of the mask is going to be made up of part G, and this is going to be traced, mirrored, and cut out of some 4mm foam. The section that goes up towards the tear duct of the eye and the back sides will be rounded over with a rotary tool. After a light heat treat, you can see where the front of this piece tapers toward the end. Superglue is then added and the back corner can be lined up. The front of part G will follow the curve of the eye. Part H is going to make up the ears, and this is going to fit right in with the back side of part G. This piece is going to be traced, mirrored, and then cut out of some 6mm foam. The very front tip of part H fits right down into the gap to make the mask look more seamless. Using a pencil, I mark rough placement of where this is going to go on the mask. But before this piece is attached, I go ahead and round over all the edges with my rotary tool and give it a light heat treatment. I can also now mark where adhesive is going to go. To attach part H, I'm going to use some contact cement and a little bit of super glue. This double adhesive method will make sure that it's a very strong bond. I would recommend to line up part H and part G first, and then work your way towards the front. Adding a little more adhesive, I can then tuck the tip down into that gap. This just gives the whole eye a more menacing look. The eyebrow will go on top, and this is going to be made out of part I, which is traced and cut out of some 4mm foam. This piece is also rounded over with a rotary tool and heat treated before it's glued down. And just like part H, the part I tip will go right at the edge of the eye. This process could then be repeated for the opposite side. Part J is going to make up the section that's going to be the jaw of the mask, and this is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam, making sure to note the line that will line up with the upper section. This piece can also be rounded over and heat sealed before being glued to the inside of the mask. Now, placement of this may vary for your face, so make sure that you dry fit it so it looks good on you before you glue it on. Now, you don't have to add this piece, it's just an additional detail layer. But on my mask, part K is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam. This is going to be glued into place while part J is rounded. It's going to help make sure that part J retains this shape and conforms to my face. But like I said, you don't have to add this, it's no big deal. The elastic we're going to add to the bottom as a chin strap should help these pieces conform to your face regardless. With everything in place, I can now attach the bottom portion of the ear, which is going to be part L. The inside of this piece will be cut at about a 30-degree angle. This is going to allow it to bend inwards when attached to the ear. And it's going to do two things. It's going to add more visual detail, but it's also going to help keep the ear out away from the side of the helmet. The seam can then be cleaned up with your rotary tool, sanding sponge, and heat sealed. Now, because I'm building on the fly, I decided to change the shape of my ears just a little bit, and this new shape has been reflected in the template you're printing out. But that's the great thing about foam, is that if there's something you don't like, you can easily change it. I also added some detail lines onto the template that you can add to your ears if you want. I would probably recommend to do this before they're attached, but again, I'm building as I go. So in my case, I trace my detail lines and I follow those with a well-sharpened hobby blade. I drew on two different ones, but decided not to use the lower one. A heat gun applied to the foam will then open these scored lines up, and always remember to wear your respirator when heating and sanding foam. To make my lines a little more pronounced, I opened them up just a bit more with a tongue depressor. I then cut some very thin strips of foam. These are going to be used at the top of the helmet to cover our seams. And when I was designing my templates for the helmet, I kept the seams in certain spots just for this process. Because yes, it is covering the seams, but it's also making it more visually interesting. And just like other portions of this build, you don't have to do this to yours. If you wanted to over-treat your seams and make them really smooth and add some quick seal so the whole top of the helmet is one piece, that's fine too. Just because I'm going for a specific look with my helmet doesn't mean that you have to copy me 100%. And on my seams, I am using super glue versus contact cement just because it's a lot cleaner process. Super glue is applied to the seam and then the strip is laid into place, causing a very minimal mess. The only time I switched this up are for the strips that were running to the front of the mask, and that's because I wanted them to start at a certain point in the back and then veer towards the eyes. And I feel that the eyes are a very important focal point on this mask, and it just helps you draw your eyes to them. I added a little bit of battle damage to this one before adding 2 light coats of black Plasti-Dip. After the Plasti-Dip had been allowed to cure, I added an additional layer of gray down the middle where the yellow is going to go. Then just like the chest and the shoulder pads, the helmet was then sprayed with red oxide primer, some flat yellow, and some dark blue. This is going to give me a good base color for hand painting, where I'm going to be using Liquitex Heavy Body Raw Sienna, Cadmium Yellow, and Turner's Yellow. And if you want even a deeper look into the painting process, check out part 2 of the Wolverine chest armor. But the pigments here are pretty much applied in the same way, using 1-inch mop brushes and smaller filbert brushes. The point here being not to apply the paint to the surface, covering it all in the same way. You want those variations in color to signify as dirt and grime. The same blue pigments are also going to be mixed together. That's going to be Liquitex Cobalt Blue, Ultramarine Blue, and a little bit of Cadmium Red. This pigment will be applied to all the blue sections as a wash, using quite a bit of water. Additional paints left on the surface will be dabbed away using a damp paper towel. I want these ears to kind of have a leathery look to them, and this difference in color variations will help break it up visually. The paint is also applied to the backside, making sure not to get it onto the yellow. Smaller detail brushes are also used to fill in sections on the front. Using a larger mop brush and pretty much no water, Cobalt Blue will be stippled onto the surface. Once the paint has pretty much been used up on the bristles, the mop brush is then used to scrub the paints around. This will help minimize any brush strokes while feathering the pigments. Again, this is also going to be applied to the backside, but do not get cobalt on the yellow. It will not come off and you will have to repaint over it. For the whiteout on the eyes, I'm going to be using some white chiffon fabric. You can pick this up from pretty much any fabric store. Sections of this fabric are cut larger than the eyes because eventually I'm going to trim away the excess. Then using a low temp hot glue gun, the fabric can be pressed into place. Low temp here being important so that you do not burn your fingers. The hot glue is dotted along the inside edge of the eye and then the fabric is pulled tight. If the fabric somehow gets wrinkles in it or just doesn't look right, rip it out, start again. The thing that's really cool about this fabric is once your head is in there, there's no light from the back side, so you can see out, but people can't see in. Utilizing some very sharp, small fabric scissors, any excess material can now be trimmed away from the hot glue. After that's complete, additional daubs of hot glue are then placed around the edge of the fabric. And it doesn't matter what it looks like on the inside, as long as the outside looks awesome. To secure the mask around the chin, I'm going to be using some elastic straps. These are just going to be cut to length and then hot glued to either side. Of course, you're going to want to measure this so that the mask fits you. To secure this, I'm just using that low temp hot glue, but once I'm sure of the placement, I added a little bit of super glue as well. so you all can see what it takes to put together Wolverine's helmet. And again, if you want to make one of these, or if you want to modify the patterns to make a different version of it, go through the links that are down in the description section. That'll take you to my website. The patterns are free to download from there. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram, because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.